Jiggers, also known as sand fleas or chigo fleas, are tiny parasites that burrow into the skin and cause painful wounds. Scientifically called Tunga penetrans, they are found mainly in tropical and subtropical regions, especially in Africa, South America, and the Caribbean. Despite being so small, often no larger than a grain of sand, they can cause serious health problems, from itching and swelling to infections and even permanent damage. Because of their painful effects and the way they spread in poor communities, many myths and false beliefs have grown around them. These myths often make the problem worse, as people may follow harmful practices, ignore medical advice, or shame victims instead of helping them. To protect people from both the parasite and misinformation, it is important to separate fact from fiction. One of the most common myths is that jigger infestations happen because a person is lazy or dirty. In many rural communities, people suffering from jiggers are unfairly labeled as careless, unhygienic, or unwilling to keep themselves clean. The fact, however, is very different. Jiggers are not caused by laziness, but by poverty, lack of resources, and living conditions. They thrive in sandy soil and dusty environments, often around animal shelters or poorly maintained homes. People who cannot afford shoes are more likely to get jiggers, not because they are unclean, but because they are forced to walk barefoot. Even individuals who bathe daily and keep their homes tidy can still become victims if they live in areas where jiggers are common. Another widespread myth is that jiggers are a type of worm. This confusion arises because the swelling caused by jiggers sometimes looks similar to skin diseases caused by worms, and the way the parasite grows inside the skin can be mistaken for a worm-like creature. In reality, jiggers are not worms at all. They are fleas, tiny insects that belong to the same family as the fleas that affect cats, dogs, and other animals. The female flea burrows into the skin to lay eggs, and as it grows, the swelling forms. This difference is important to understand because treating fleas and treating worms require completely different approaches. Believing the worm myth can lead to people using the wrong medicines or traditional remedies that do not work. A third myth is that once someone has jiggers, there is nothing that can be done. This belief often creates fear and hopelessness in affected families. The truth is that jigger infestations can be treated safely and effectively if done properly. The standard method is to carefully remove the flea with sterilized tools, clean the wound with antiseptics, and use antibiotics if necessary. Medical centers often provide professional care that prevents infections. While it is true that repeated infestations are possible if the environment is not cleaned or if people remain barefoot, each case can be treated, and prevention can significantly reduce future risks. Believing that jiggers are untreatable only increases suffering and delays proper care. There is also a myth that only people in rural villages get jiggers. While it is true that jiggers are most common in poor rural settings, they can affect anyone exposed to infested soil without protection. Even visitors or tourists who walk barefoot in sandy regions can become victims. The difference is that wealthier people often have better access to shoes, medical treatment, and clean environments, which makes infestations less frequent. But this does not mean urban residents are completely safe. The fact is that jiggers do not discriminate. They affect anyone who comes into contact with them. Poverty simply increases exposure and reduces the ability to prevent or treat the problem. Another damaging myth is that jiggers are a curse or punishment. In some cultures, when families suffer repeated infestations, others may accuse them of being cursed or punished by supernatural forces. This false belief creates stigma, shame, and discrimination, making victims feel isolated. The fact, however, is clear. Jiggers are a medical and environmental problem, not a spiritual one. They are parasites that thrive in certain conditions, and the solution lies in hygiene, protective footwear, and community action, not superstition. By treating the problem as a health issue instead of a curse, communities can focus on real solutions and support those who need help. Another myth is that children are the only ones who get jiggers. While children are more vulnerable because they often run barefoot and spend more time on the ground, adults can also be heavily affected. Farmers, workers, and elderly people who cannot afford shoes or who live in infested environments are also at high risk. In fact, for adults, jigger infestations can be especially damaging because they limit mobility and prevent people from working, which worsens poverty. Recognizing that jiggers affect all ages helps communities understand that everyone needs protection. Finally, there is the myth that jiggers spread from person to person like a contagious disease. This is not true. Jiggers are not spread by direct contact with an infected person. Instead, they come from the soil. If someone with jiggers enters a clean environment, they do not infect others directly. What can happen is that the eggs released from their skin fall into the soil, which later develops into new fleas. This means the problem is environmental, not contagious in the traditional sense. Understanding this fact helps reduce fear and stigma around victims.
Myths about jiggers create confusion, fear, and discrimination, while facts provide the knowledge needed to fight the problem. The truth is that jiggers are tiny fleas, not worms or curses. They are not caused by laziness, but by poverty and environmental conditions. They can be treated safely, and they can be prevented through simple measures like wearing shoes, cleaning living spaces, and spreading awareness. By correcting myths with facts, communities can protect vulnerable families, reduce suffering, and break the cycle of pain caused by these tiny but powerful parasites.